Hello, and welcome to today's special webinar event on why off-the-shelf ransomware attacks succeed. Today's webinar is sponsored by Rubrik and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, there are a few things you should know about this webinar. First off, we want this to be a very educational event for you, so we encourage any and all questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you asked. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. There's a Get Started with Rubrik link, and the resources also include links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, which is an Actual Tech Media printed resource on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center where you can find out about more fantastic events like this one. So I encourage you to check out those handouts now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. So if you're watching this on demand, on this webinar on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing's already occurred. But if you are the winner, you can choose to donate the value of that gift card to one of our selected charities. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found at actualtechmedia.com. Scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenters. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. There's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So at the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So today's session is going to be a conversation between me and Levern Wilson about ransomware and about Rubrik's approach to helping companies deal with the after effects of ransomware. We'll also have a demo of the Rubrik solution, followed by a Q&A session for your questions. So, Levern, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure being here.
Delighted you could be here. Maybe we could start out with you telling us a little bit about your role at Rubrik and sort of what your day-to-day responsibilities are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in role for just over a year now. I'm a sales engineer specific to the mid-market space. I am aligned to a few sales makers, and my responsibility is to be a trusted advisor and a SME of sorts to make sure that a customer's environment and our product will get along nicely and that what we offer will be of benefits to them in their environment, specific to backups, of course.
Gotcha. So first off, let's get to the title of today's session. It's a reference to off-the-shelf ransomware. So what do you mean by that? How's it distinguished from other forms of ransomware?
Well, the distinction of off-the-shelf ransomware attacks versus any other ransomware attacks is really more a matter of how the criminals or the cyber terrorists are actually gaining and then deploying the attacks themselves. So off-the-shelf ransomware attacks could be viewed as ransomware as a service, so to speak. There really doesn't take a lot of intellectual horsepower to, go to the dark web, obtain an off-the-shelf attack, and then casting a wide net to see, how many fish you can grab and which one of those are going to be paying out the ransoms because you have their backups locked down. So there's really no distinction between, what one might consider a normal ransomware attack, although I hate using that word normal, versus an off-the-shelf attack, because really it's just, bad people doing bad things to good people and trying to somehow financially benefit themselves because, somebody inadvertently clicked something they shouldn't have, and then voila, their data is locked down and they can't do anything.
Right. In the off-the-shelf variety, do they tend to be more automated? Whereas the other ones, they're actual attackers on the other side with fingers on keyboard, waiting for things to come in, or what's the difference there?
Well, so I think with an off-the-shelf ransomware attack, you have either an individual or a group of individuals working in concert, and what they're essentially doing is they're co-opting something that somebody already put together, and then they're just essentially spreading a wide a net as possible. Whereas something that's a bit more prescriptive, something that's a bit more directed, would have somebody sitting behind a keyboard actually leveraging an attack at an organization. Whereas off the shelf is, let me send out 1,000 emails and see what happens.
Right. So most of what we're seeing out there, I assume, is off the shelf.
A lot of it is
But
off the shelf, absolutely.
yeah,
And it's one of the I think the common sort of themes behind whether it's a prescriptive ransomware attack or an off the shelf ransomware attack is that in the last 18 months we've seen that 70% of these attacks have involved encrypting backups. So that's a massive vulnerability for a lot of organizations, and that's essentially what these attacks are doing because they know that once they have their data encrypted and locked down, that these organizations are at the mercy of these criminals, and then they hopefully they're able to either recover in a manner that allows them to not have to pay the ransom, or if they leverage their cyber insurance to take care of that monetary requirement to get their data decrypted. So yeah, it's just bad people doing bad things once again. That's what it boils down to,
gotcha,
really.
gotcha. Um, in your day-to-day engagements, with customers, or maybe speaking sort of for what Rubrik is seeing across the board, we all know that ransomware is bad. It's sort of like a epidemic or levels, but is it getting worse? Is it just sort of maintaining it at a high level, or is it declining at all? What are you seeing out there?
It's certainly not declining. I wouldn't say there's been any plateau that's been reached. If anything, ransomware attacks have ramped up. And what I'm seeing in the day to day is that the number of customers that we've spoken to since the onset of the actual, global pandemic has increased tremendously. Our teams are expanding every day, and to meet the demand of customers that are reaching out to us to learn a little more about our product and what we can do to help protect their data so that they're able to, maintain, business continuity. And in my day to day, I speak to customers that range anywhere from, an organization with less than 100 people to organization that have north of 1,000 individuals. Whether they're responsible for 30 terabytes of data or 150 terabytes or more of data. I think ultimately for all of them, there's one unifying factor is that they understand, given in today's climate of the digital pandemic, and I'm glad you referenced that piece. I consider it a digital pandemic with ransomware attacks. They understand that it's not a matter of if they're going to be a victim; it's more a matter of when, and they want to be prepared and ensure that they're able to recover quickly without having to, without having to provide, monetary compensation to these criminals so that they're able to continue their day-to-day operation.
Yeah, and staying on sort of that pandemic theme, with COVID, the focus is now on Omicron, with Delta still being prevalent. But what's happening with ransomware? I mean, you mentioned that 70% number for of ransomware attacks that are encrypting backup, which is that's an amazing number. That seems really high. But what else are you seeing in terms of trends there with types of attacks?
Well, with the types of attacks, you have your, normal, regular phishing attacks, right? Somebody sends an email with a link. It's got an embedded macro. Somebody inadvertently clicks it because they think it's a photo of a cute cat. I'm sorry to use cats as the default, but everybody's familiar with the sort of the trend of looking at photos of cats. So there's that,
Yeah,
and then of course there's the the other types of attacks that we hear about. Ryuk, there's plenty of variants that are going on right now where, we see, especially in the industry where we see updates from news outlets of, organizations that are being, crippled by these ransomware attacks. So, it's not declining. It hasn't hit a plateau. I think it's steadily increasing because for the criminals, essentially, for them, it's a low barrier of entry to get into that, and then it's a high yield of return, really, because if they spend time to initiate, let's say, 100 attacks and only one of them pays out, for them, that's all upside. There's really
Mhm.
no aside from the legal ramifications of being a criminal and doing those things, right? And with the fact that you could be sitting somewhere across the globe and initiate an attack for organizations that are in somewhere in the middle of Nebraska. That within itself causes a lot of difficulties and hurdles in being able to apprehend the criminals themselves, across jurisdictions, international lines, and whatnot. So again, for them, it's all upside essentially. It's just let's start an attack, see what happens. If one person pays out, hey, we got a huge payday for them. It's a huge payday.
Right, right. Um, so I'm going to put up a slide, one of your slides here. But is there a type of response that's working? Even before you get to the backup. There are companies that are doing certain things that are keeping them from getting hit in the first place, or is everybody just getting hit, regardless of
The
of how much stuff they throw up in front of it?
so regardless of how much stuff they throw out in front of it, people are getting hit. Organizations are getting hit. The only way that I am familiar with that would preclude an organization from being or falling victim to a ransomware attack is if their infrastructure and their data center was completely segregated from the outside world, meaning that there is no connection to the internet at all. There is no email that they use outside of or access inside their infrastructure that would enable communication from outside their organization. So if you are a closed off, black site essentially with no access to the internet, that I think is probably the only method to ensure that you're less likely to be victim to a ransomware attack. I think oftentimes that a lot of administrators, this doesn't happen often. It does occur occasionally. I think a lot of times administrators often fail to realize that, bad actors can happen inside the firewall. So even in those situations, a disgruntled employee can launch an attack from inside the firewall by just bringing in a USB flash key, right? Sticking it into their laptop, instantiating the attack and, walking away. And that's really it. So, honestly, they're really, again, aside from having a closed off network from the outside world and making sure that all your employees are thoroughly happy all the time, anyone that's connected to the internet is themselves susceptible to ransomware attacks.
Yeah. So like a complete air gap is basically
Yeah.
your only defense. And that just reminds me of the Stuxnet scenario back from 2010 in Iran, taking down the nuclear facility with, I think that was a contractor with a USB or something,
Yep.
how it got in, if I'm
There you
remembering
go.
correctly. But
Boom. That's it.
yeah, um, it just, I guess in terms of this slide, so there are all those red security layers there. From a ransomware perspective, is there value in invest? I mean, obviously there's value outside of ransomware in investing in all of those, but um, is that still part of the ransomware solution to have all that stuff?
Yes, absolutely. We would never recommend or suggest that organizations don't invest in certain security features that would help enable them to protect themselves from certain types of attacks. So, yeah, get perimeter security, get network security, endpoint security, application security, all the security levels that are available up and down the stack. Absolutely get that. That is not anything that we would ever recommend a customer foregoing, because you have to practice due diligence to ensure that you're doing everything you can to mitigate from a ransomware attack occurring. Now, this simply illustrates that regardless of all the monies that are spent on these particular levels of security, that even with that, ransomware attacks can still occur, right? We hear stories or read news articles for everybody on the call, everyone who's watching this or watching this later. I'm sure you've heard of large organizations being hit by ransomware attacks, and that they're spending a considerable amount of money and at all these different levels to ensure that their data is safe. And even with those capital investments, they're still susceptible to ransomware attacks. So that simply highlights that, hey, even though you spend money, please understand that something could happen. And that's essentially what you see at the bottom level, the data. Essentially, that little dotted line and then boink bouncing off is just a simple illustration of how Rubrik and how we're able to protect customers' data. And we're offering security at the point of data to ensure that ransomware attacks are not successful and that companies and organizations are able to recover quickly.
Okay, great. So let's go back to the current ransomware attacks. So the attacker gets past all the layers. We've got a slide here of what current attacks look like. Can you walk us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is sort of a black and white illustration of what today's threat looks like, right? It's scripted. It kind of follows the same methodology. So what happens is that first, a ransomware attack has been deployed at an organization, right? And one of the things that most organizations don't know is that prior to receiving that ransom note, they don't know if that they've fallen victim to a ransomware attack. That attack could have laid dormant for a week or a month. They don't know until they receive that notification. So ransomware is successful in infiltrating their network, getting to their backups. They've locked the backups down. They've encrypted the backups. Now, a ransomware note is sent, right? So this is like the nightmare of a lot of administrators across IT. The ransomware note is sent, they receive it and they read it and they're like, hey, give us 1 point. I think CrowdStrike recently released a report that says the average ransomware cost or recovering from ransomware is $1.2 million. That's a considerable amount of money. So $1.2 million. Let's just pretend you get a note for $1.2 million. You give us this money and then we'll maybe unlock or decrypt your data, right? So the note is received. At that point, IT teams have two options. They could either pay the ransom, right? Either pay it themselves or leveraging their cyber insurance, or they can attempt to recover. Now, if they attempt to recover, they typically, in most organizations may have a couple of desperate teams working together. So you have, a security operations team and your IT operations team. They're both normally working independent of each other, trying to resolve a problem that's impacting everybody, right? Once these teams are engaged and they determine that their backups are compromised and there's nothing they can do to recover for them, they end up paying the ransom. So it's a matter of understanding, hey, who's going to be involved? How are they going to be involved? What is the time commitment for these teams to determine, what it's going to take to recover from the ransomware attack? Another consideration is that, if an organization is willing to spend the time to see if they can recover, have they preemptively put a dollar amount to what it costs them to be down, per hour or even per day? And can they afford to lose those revenue dollars while their teams are working to recover, just to determine that after they've done everything they can, that they can't recover and they end up having to pay the ransom regardless. So that's an additional investment on top of the monies they've already lost.
Yeah, and one thing that always interests me is how companies are organizing their IT departments. And just because you're involved with the mid market, and you're mentioning here, the IT ops and SecOps, do a lot of mid market companies have distinct teams doing that, or is it often just in the IT department? What do you see in terms of when you're engaging with customers?
It really runs the entire range, right? So on the lower end of an organization that has, let's say, $1 million in revenue annually, and that they're a small business and mid market company, they may have 2 or 3 individuals that sort of do everything. They have an IT manager that's responsible for sort of overseeing all the projects, and then you have a couple of people that run around doing all the day-to-day operations. They might report up to a director or a VP that may not have any idea what's going on within the IT organization. And if you're continuing up the stack to larger organizations that still fall under the mid-market umbrella, they may have a CISO, they may have an IT director, they may have multiple teams all working, in a unified front. So it really, for mid-market, it really runs the gambit, and it can go anywhere from like 2 or 3 individuals up to a dedicated team of 10 or 15. Just it depends on the organization, their structure, the revenue, and what they can afford to pay.
Gotcha. Yeah, and we had, one of our audience members, Bradford, put in an important point which is do most mid markets and SMBs outsource OPS. So I guess there's also an MSP involved a lot of times in doing one or both parts of that.
Yep. I've had numerous conversations. Yeah, I've had numerous conversations with organizations that leverage a local MSP or national MSP to provide some level of functionality specific to their IT, whether it's endpoint, backup, endpoint security, whether it's backups in general or even just storage. So yeah, it runs the gambit. The MSPs are definitely part of that scenario.
Great. So obviously there's a more hopeful scenario, I think, than the last one, which is, where even if the attack gets through, you have options other than paying the ransom or, trying to rebuild your data. How does this work? What are we looking at on this slide?
So yeah, in this slide, what we're seeing here is a scenario where Rubrik is a part of the story for that organization. So ransomware locks the data down, the note is received, and then you have, option 1, pay the ransom, but we don't really encourage that if you're using our product. Option 2, attempt to recover, right? So we encourage, cross team collaboration. So they're working in concert to determine, what needs to be done to recover from the ransomware attack, and then because their data is protected and safe, they know their backups were safeguarded. They know they have some insight into the attack itself. They understand what it's going to take to recover from a time standpoint, and then they're able to recover the data successfully without having to pay the ransom or leveraging cyber insurance to do that piece. So yeah, this is a scenario that we are very familiar with when dealing with customers who are current Rubrik customers that are recovering from ransomware attacks.
Yeah, so continuing with that, ransomware is an arms race. Just that stat that you listed earlier, the 70% of attacks are encrypting backup. I think is a pretty good example of that. But so the bad guys know people are making backups, and they're countering the countermeasures. What are some of the techniques that even off-the-shelf ransomware is using to defeat attempts to back up data?
So one of the major threat vectors for a lot of organizations is that they are relying on legacy platforms to be a part of their backup solution. And what I mean by a legacy platform is, in this example here on the slide you're showing, traditional architecture, each one of those skull and crossbone points essentially illustrates the fact that, for example, a lot of these components, your backup server, your media server, your disk-based backup target, they're all leveraging Windows Server OS to some degree. And so because of that, you have bad actors, in the world today that are orchestrating ransomware attacks by putting together code that specifically highlights vulnerabilities specific to Windows OS. And it is not anything that, I'm not saying anything negative about Windows OS. It's just simply based on the fact that they are the market leader within enterprise for providing that particular layer of service. Unless you're a fully Linux organization, more than likely an overwhelming majority of organizations leverage Windows OS in their data center, right? So again, you have a backup proxy, backup server, backup catalog, media server, target scene. They're all going to leverage Windows Server to one degree. And once you run into a scenario where you have one particular item within that stack that's Windows Server 2016, for example, but it doesn't have the most recent security patch, and then another server is running Windows 2016 also, but it's running the security patch previous to the one that other component is leveraging, then that within itself becomes a threat vector because they're not leveraging the most recent security patch. And I get it, right? I was on that side. I was on the customer side. I was responsible for maintaining that particular piece. And I know that oftentimes, because, we've all heard of Patch Tuesday, right? Microsoft is notorious for having updates come out on one day of the week. And if there is a major update that happens to come out specific to addressing vulnerabilities, oftentimes administrators are faced with the conundrum of, hey, do I do something? Do I update? If I update, is it going to crash my production VMs? Is everything's going to come falling down? What's going to happen? And sort of the thought process is, hey, I've got all these security points, before it even gets to here that I should be protected, so they don't, put the new security updates and patches out into production. And so there's sort of a disconnect there. And unfortunately, ransomware attacks look for that disconnect, and they're immediately worming their way through an infrastructure looking for backup targets so that they can start encrypting the data. That's in a traditional architecture. If you look at the if you look at the Rubrik's, no problem. If you look at the the Rubrik Zero Trust architecture outline, you'll notice that because we are not reliant upon Windows Server in any degree, we are running on a highly modified Debian kernel, so it is a Linux box. So the data, once we capture it, we encrypt it. It is encrypted in flight and in rest. It is a append-only file system. Think of it as a worm. Read once, write once, read many. And so the data cannot be encrypted. It cannot be modified. It cannot be deleted. Once we capture your information, capture your data, it is safeguarded from ransomware attacks.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about some of the specifics here.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are sort of the tools that we have in our security toolbox at the point of data. Again, I have to make the clarification. We're not a security product. Fortinet, other Palo Alto networks, there are other companies that do that, and they do that well. What we are is security at the point of data. So we offer a multiple or an array of different items that individuals can leverage to help safeguard their data at the box. So first, we're a hardened, fully integrated Linux platform. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we're a highly modified Debian kernel. So again, it is an append-only file system. Once we capture your data, it cannot be modified, deleted, or encrypted. We provide a retention lock on our appliance so that individuals aren't able to artificially manipulate, the clock to sort of age, backups off of the appliance. We remove that capability. We have MFA. We offer TOTP. So, zero trust design, again, with the encryption, with data at rest and in flight. So we make sure that, that is not somehow something that someone can intercept and then use it for their own, own benefit. And our immutable file system. So that is, at the heart of it, speaks to what we do. This, offer a little bit more in terms of security features, FIPS, SOC Type 2, ISO 27001. So we have quite a bit crammed into our box to make sure that once a customer decides, hey, I'm going to leverage Rubrik to provide backups for my data. Once we have that information, once we have your data captured, it's safeguarded, and you're going to be able to recover from a ransomware attack if it were to occur. I'm sorry, when it occurs.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about in the past, in regard to Rubrik is the blast radius of a ransomware attack. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that concept and maybe how some of these features address that and help people
Oh,
respond to
yeah.
ransomware.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So one of the challenges that organizations have to face when trying to recover from a ransomware attack is first understanding that they are a victim of a ransomware attack. Secondly, one of the things that they have to, they're faced with is trying to determine, how far back does that ransomware attack go? Is it
Right.
something that instantiated yesterday, or was it a month ago? Right? And do they have any applications that provide that level of insight? We actually do have a product that is available. It's called Radar, and Radar is an excellent tool. What it does is that at first it's leveraged through our Polaris platform, which is our SaaS application. And what we're doing is that once a backup has occurred, when a backup occurs and the data is captured, Radar will then scan the metadata associated to those to that backup to look for anomalous activity. So that anomalous activity could be encryption, it could be deletion, or it could be a combination, right? So once we capture that information and Radar does its thing and it's scanning the metadata and it's noticing that there's something different in this backup window versus the previous one, it alerts you. And it not only does it tell you that something's wrong, it shows you what's wrong. And then it also provides you with an outlet to recover from that wrong item that's occurred. So whether it's a encryption of files across, your entire data set, or if it's a mass deletion of files because of either planned obsolescence or a bad actor, you're still going to be notified. Hey, here it is. Here's what's happening. Here's an opportunity for you to take a closer look and give you the insights to determine the blast radius. This shows you in hard data where this attack is occurring and what you can do to remediate from that before it becomes a bigger problem. Absolutely. So yeah, Radar is an
Great.
excellent tool. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we've been talking a lot. I'm sure people would like to see some of this stuff. So I understand you have a demo.
Yeah, absolutely. Give me a moment. And
Okay.
what I'll do
Yeah.
is I'll
So
get
while
that up and running.
Yep. And while Laverne gets that set up, I just want to issue a quick reminder that we will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation here. So we've got a lot of questions that have come in already. That's great. A lot of good questions in there, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. But if you do have a question, don't sit on your hands. Put it in there, and we'll get to that too.
Absolutely. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
And there we go.
I see it.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So let me go ahead and get this started. And what you're noticing here is our UI. This is our user interface. This is Rubrik Cloud Data Management, and this is the item that you would be seeing and managing our appliance from to help protect and safeguard your backups. So our CDM is our single software fabric, and again, it comes deployed on our appliance. And a couple of things that I want to call out specific to this particular product is that one, the back end is HTML5. Now, that may not mean much to some people, but it is important to note that there are no additional plugins or Java scripting that's required to access. So as long as you have a secure connection and a full web browser, you're actually able to access this. The second item that I want to call out is that we are an API. We do take an API first approach. And to that end, we actually do have a website that is generally available for the public to review to sort of look at our API first approach. A lot can be automated, whether you use PowerShell, Ansible, Puppet, or Chef, ServiceNow, vRealize, just to sort of name a few. Let me pop back in. Let me pop in here real quick And just to sort of show you that website, it is build.rubrik.com. If you are interested in taking a look at this after the webinar presentation, I encourage you to do so. It is open to the general public, so feel free to go take a look at it. Again, it's build.rubrik.com. So back to our UI. The first page, or actually the first item we see here, is a quick summary. It is an overview of the last 24 hours of activity. Gives you some information at a high level just to sort of take a look at and see what's going on. And you're able to modify this to reflect whatever information is specific to you, or rather you would find important. Now, the first item that I want to go into and highlight is what we refer to as our SLA domain engine. Our SLA domain engine provides our customers the ability to create a declarative policy versus creating a backup job. Sort of the differentiator here is that oftentimes with a lot of our competitors or a lot of backup service providers, individuals or customers are forced to jump through multiple gates. Exclude objects from backup, define backup order, specify backup storage settings, configure this, do that, trash collection. There's quite a bit going on. With our product, we simplify it by collapsing all of that into an interface that only asks 3 questions essentially to get that up and running. So it absolutely simplifies protection and also helps automate. In order to get that started, you're going to come over here and then you're going to select the plus button to add an SLA domain. First thing you're going to do is apply an SLA domain name. I recommend leveraging a naming convention that's going to be something that is easy for you to recognize at a quick glance. Now, as far as the snapshots themselves, it could be as simple as taking one every 4 hours and for 7 days, once a day for 31 days, once a month for 12 months, or once a year for 5 years. Now, the important piece here is that all these variables are arbitrary. So if you want to take a snapshot every 6 hours, 8 hours, 1 hour, it's entirely up to you. And as far as how long you want to keep them for, again, it's entirely up to you. Another thing too to consider is that you have the ability to create as few or as many SLA domains as you would like. I don't typically recommend running at parity. Say, for example, you currently have 150 backup jobs. We could probably take care of that through just 3 or 5 SLA policies, depending upon how you are currently wanting to have your items backed up. So the second screen is going to be where we set archival and retention. This slider bar is going to be where you determine how long those backups are going to be available locally on the appliance. Now, just to speak real quick on our appliance, from the previous slide that was shown, it was a hardened Linux box. It is a 2U hyperconverged appliance, so 4 nodes. Each node has spindle specific to capacity, compute, RAM, and it also has SSD for performance. So that is how our hyperconverged box is set up and when we deploy our product. And as far as, again, retention, our recommendation normally is up to 30 days local. And then for archival purposes, you are free to leverage any S3 compatible cloud archival provider. Some examples include Azure, AWS, GCP, Wasabi, Island, Backblaze, the list goes on and on. Again, the only caveat for a cloud archival target is so long as it is S3 compatible, you should be good. Now, for those customers who have some restrictions in leveraging the cloud or don't currently have a cloud story or are not interested in going to the cloud, we still have mechanisms in place to assist in archiving your backups. You can select to move the backups off of the appliance onto an NFS file share or to an object storage device or object storage target. That's entirely up to you again. So whether you're in the cloud or not, going to go to the cloud or entirely on-prem, we have the capability to help you warehouse your backups. Now, In order to progress in the demo, I do need to select one archival target. And so I'll select Azure because it's the first one. Replication is available. It's just a simple matter of toggling the switch and having a second Rubrik appliance, ideally at a DR site. And then again, with the slider bar, leveraging how long you want those backups on the appliance available to you. Same guidance here as far as my previous comment to up to 30 days. So whether it's 10, 20, or 30, our recommendation is 30 days or less. Another recommendation I typically make is that if your primary site is 30 days, your replication site should be 30 days too. But it's entirely up to you how you want to operate that. It's just a suggestion. Now, for the sake of the demo, I'll deselect this piece and I will highlight one additional feature that we have available, and that is enable instant archive. This is a great feature to leverage in those instances where you want to significantly reduce your RTO. What happens here is that once you have this feature enabled, a copy will be available locally on the appliance, and at the same time, a copy will be generated and sent to your archival target. So in this example, for 30 days, you'll have 2 copies of that same snapshot available to you. Now, of course, on day 31, on the appliance, the on-prem copy will expire. However, you will still maintain copy that was available in the archival target. So again, with enabling instant archive, you're able to drastically reduce your RTOs by having 2 copies available in concert for a defined period of time. In this example, 30 days. I will deselect this feature and click next to go to the summary page. And this is simply an opportunity to review your SLA policy, look at everything that you've put together. If you like what you see, you click create and you have an SLA policy that you're able to apply. Now, this is a demo environment, so I don't want to do that because there's quite a few that already exist. Now, that is creating an SLA policy. Here is how you are able to apply an SLA policy. In this example, we'll be looking at an ESXi environment, so VMware. And through here, we see that we have VMs, folders, cluster hosts, and tags. Now, in the first highlighted example, VMs, you have the ability to assign an SLA policy individually across whatever VMs you wish to leverage. Now, whenever I speak to customers specific to this particular approach, what I normally reference is, let's say you have 5 or maybe 10 VMs that are absolutely mission critical and are responsible for keeping the lights on within your business. Now, with those VMs, you might want to select those individually and then apply the appropriate SLA policy. So once you click Manage Protection, this window opens and you are able to select the appropriate SLA policy. Click Next, review the information specific to the SLA policy, and then hit Submit. Those VMs are then protected. Now, if you are in a situation where you don't have that many VMs, then this could be a great approach. However, if you're in a situation where you have several dozen or even hundreds of VMs, you may not want to individually select those. So in those instances, you can do another approach. You could, if you happen to leverage folders, apply SLA domains at the folder level. So just to sort of illustrate what that means, whenever I speak to customers, I typically say, hey, so if you have folders and each folders represent a specific business unit within your organization, let's say sales, finance, HR, whatever the case may be, right? And if you have a folder for, let's say this is an HR folder, you can apply the appropriate SLA policy. And then once the policy is applied at the folder level, all the VMs assigned to that folder will have that SLA policy assigned to it. Now, the great thing here is that if at some point after that fact, a new VM is spun up and assigned to that folder, any new VM that's assigned to a folder that has an SLA policy assigned to it will automatically inherit that SLA policy. So there's no need to go back into and then assign the SLA policy for that specific VM if it's assigned at a folder level. Same goes for tags. Similar approach. If you have tags assigned to VMs, and those tags, in my example, always is about business units, let's say sales, HR, finance. If you have a tag that's, say, well, it just says demo, right? If you assign the SLA policy, all right, similar approach, you select the SLA policy. If you like what you see, then you apply it. Then after it's been applied, then all the VMs that are currently tagged with that tag will have that SLA policy assigned to it. And of course, after that fact, any new VMs that are spun up and assigned that tag, it will also automatically inherit that SLA policy. So there are no additional steps required. Same thing for clusters and hosts. If you want to apply a single SLA policy across everything, absolutely. If you wanted to apply an SLA policy, why am I not able to click this? Oh, there we go. If you wanted to apply an SLA policy at a host level, then just make that determination and you have the ability to do so. So that is creating an SLA policy and then assigning the SLA policy. The other item I want to show you is a file level recovery. Now, one of the things that we have available for our customers is a file level search feature that is part of our CDM. So we have a quick overview of my virtual machine. This is the SLA policy assigned. This is the oldest and most recent snapshot. So whenever I'm discussing this portion with customers, I always sort of reference, hey, let's say somebody approaches the IT team and says, I lost a file, I fat-fingered the keyboard, and I don't know where it is. We can help recover in the example when they know the name of the file. So I typically type in two terms. First, I type in host just to sort of illustrate, hey, any file with the term host associated with it will yield in the results screen. So there's quite a few here. Now, more than likely, whomever is requesting this service or assistance is not going to give you the term host, unless that happens to be the name of the file. I then leverage a file that I have on my desktop, on my virtual machine in the demo environment. What you see here is Vader, right? It's actually a JPEG of Darth Vader. I'm a Star Wars fan. I don't know if you can see it behind me, but I got BB-8 right here. Anyway, here's where we're also a little different from a lot of our competitors. So normally, if there aren't any specific requirements to go to a previous point in time, you'll probably just select the most recent copy. You can download it, restore, export, or select additional files to complete the task. Now, if we go back far enough to previous points in time, you're going to see a cloud icon. Now, this is a quick visual indicator that these particular snapshots are no longer available locally, but have been sent to the cloud archival, well, your archival target, whether that's in the cloud or on-prem, is immaterial. It just simply indicates that, hey, it's no longer available locally on the appliance. Now, we're able to provide this level of service like most backup vendors can. The differentiator here, when it comes to certain cloud archival providers, is that through this service and our engagement, a lot of our competitors actually force customers to call down the entire VM to access that single file. Now, on the surface, this doesn't seem like much. You have to consider a couple of things. One, egress fees, right? If you are familiar with certain cloud archival service providers, not only do you have to pay them to store your data, but depending upon what tier you're leveraging and how long it's been there, you may have to pay to retrieve your data. So yeah, now in this example, again, a lot of our competitors offer this level of service. However, they are requiring customers to call down the entire VM to access a single file. So which again has increased egress fee costs. And not only that, there's also additional time requirement. The differentiator for us is that we're only calling down that specific file. So we are able to, one, save you money in the event that there are egress fees, and two, we're able to save you time because we're only calling down the file and not the VM in which that file is situated in. So that's a great thing to call out, and I always do when I'm talking to customers about the way we're able to provide this service. Now, this is a file level search in the example of knowing the name of the file. If you don't know the name of the file, or the person requesting the service doesn't know the name of the file, we absolutely can help. Again, it's just a simple matter of selecting a point in time that makes sense, clicking the ellipse, and then recovering files. And then from there, you'll have to just go through the tree and determine, hey, where do you think it was? And then trying to make some, an educated guess. I'm going to be leveraging myself again as an example. I know that the Vader file is on my desktop, so there it is. Oh, if I wanted this one as well, I can select multiple files or folders, and I'm able to retrieve it, and it'll generate a grocery list here. Click next, and then for recovery type, I can download it locally. I can overwrite the original, restore to a separate folder, or export. So there are several different methods of recovery available. That is a file level recovery in the examples of knowing the name of the file or not knowing the name of the file. One additional item I want to show or highlight is our live mount capability. Now, what we're able to do is provide customers an intelligent platform to spin up VMs on our appliance in examples or times when that may be necessary. So real world application is one. Last year, the city of Durham, North Carolina was hit by a ransomware attack. They were an existing customer of Rubrik, so they were not forced to pay the ransom. However, in order to mediate from the ransomware attack, they were forced to bring down their production. And in doing so, they would be needing to disconnect critical city services to the community at large, 911, for example. And this was something that they wished not to do. Because they were a Rubrik customer, and because you're able to run VMs on our appliance, they were able to spin up VMs, 911 specifically, and present that to the community and maintain that level of service while they were at the same time recovering from the ransomware attack. So they were able to recover from the ransomware attack and provide city services at the same time. So with our appliance, we're able to provide a platform where customers can spin up VMs of virtually any size in under 10 minutes. So just to sort of illustrate that, let me do this real quick. My apologies for not having this up earlier. Let me log back in here. It should be pretty quick. What I'm going to do is just going to quickly illustrate that with our appliance, again, able to get that up and running. So you're going to pick a point in time that makes sense. You're going to click the ellipse, and then you're going to click Mount Virtual Machine. And in doing so, I have to make a couple of selections. It'll be the same thing for a customer in their environment. And then once you click, a quick notification is triggered. And then down here, you'll see in the activities window, additional notifications of the activity occurring. So I provided the one example that I always speak about, a customer of ours, the city of Durham, North Carolina. The second example that I goes back to my previous comment, Patch Tuesdays, like from Microsoft. So with our intelligent platform, with our appliance and the ability to spin up VMs locally, what we're able to provide is essentially an ad hoc test dev environment. So you can spin up a VM, you can apply those patches and updates from Microsoft just to see what kind of potential conflict will occur. And if you're able to apply those updates and everything is clean, you should be able to confidently send those updates into production so that you are able to maintain the most recent updates and security patches as Microsoft recommends. You're able to do that by leveraging our appliance, again, as a test dev environment to ensure that you don't just willy-nilly throw it out into production, crossing your fingers, hoping nothing bad happens to any of your VMs. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do a quick search in vCenter. And then you'll notice that there are 3 VMs. This is going to reference the one that I just spun up. It's powered on. It does present as an NFS file share. Now, the great thing here is that this VM, because it is running on our appliance, will still be backed up. So you won't lose any new data that may be generated. Just to illustrate the time it took to make that happen, that VM was up and running in 56 seconds. Now, I will have to mention that this is a demo environment, and there are potentially quite a few of other people doing the same thing. Yep, quite a few other people doing the same thing that I am. So in a customer environment, I'm confident in saying that this particular VM would probably be up in under 56 seconds. So that is essentially our demo, highlighting a couple of key features within our product, just to sort of illustrate what a customer can expect in terms of certain levels of service when it comes to what they're going to get with our product.
That was great. It was really a great demo, and now we have a bunch of questions that came in. So, love to get to a couple of them. Are you ready for some questions?
Well, I hope I don't mess it up. Sure.
All right. So Joshua is asking, how do you prevent malware from being backed up and encrypting the backup too?
That's a great question. And I will say this. One, again, we are not a security device, right? We're not a security appliance. Those are other responsibilities. There are malware detection software that you can get and run. Now, garbage in, garbage out for us, right? So if ransomware gets in, it's not going to affect your data because there's going to be a point in time previous to the attack where your data is safeguarded. And you can leverage Polaris to then determine, hey, something has happened, and you can mitigate that sooner rather than later. So the ransomware could get in. Once it does, we may be backing it up. However, your data is still safeguarded because it's free from being modified, appended, deleted, or encrypted.
Got it. No, that makes sense. And actually, Joshua had another question. You were talking about some of the egress fees from the cloud providers. He's wondering if there's a Rubrik egress fee.
No, we don't charge anything. So we are cloud agnostic. We don't care what cloud provider you use other than it being S3 compliant for archival purposes. So if you pay someone like Azure to warehouse your data in the cloud, that's between you and them. We only help facilitate sending the archives to that target, and we don't charge any fees to bring the data down. That is not our model.
Okay, super. Hey, Gabriel has a question on Radar. He's wondering if there's a threshold for it. So his example is, say a bad actor realizes that companies have this and they only change 2 to 3% of data each day. What are things like on the threshold side on that product?
That's an excellent question. So one of the things that Radar is doing is, first, it's developing a baseline to understand your normal change rates within your backup windows. Okay. Now, once that baseline has been captured, we then start scanning to look for anomalous activity. So if a file is encrypted, you'll be notified. If a file is deleted, if it's a single file, it may not catch it. However, it would still be noted because an activity had occurred. You may not be notified, but that activity would still be captured within Radar. Now, if a bad actor were to somehow ascertain that a potential target has Radar, and they're able to somehow surreptitiously modify the ransomware attack to keep it below certain thresholds, that's a very smart person, one. But two, the changes would still be captured so that you would be able to see it. If you were to, say, proactively go into your console and go, oh, hey, look, something's a little off. You may not be triggered by an update from Radar. You would still be notified you would still see the changes within your data sets as far as the metadata is specific to what the previous backup window was.
Well, Levern, I hate to do this because there's so many great questions that are coming in, but we're up on time. So, maybe you can respond to some of these folks afterward. But thanks so much for your time today. This has been a great presentation, great demo. Really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the participants who gave us a little bit of your time today. Please reach out to Rubrik and see what we can do to help you out and help safeguard your data.
Great. And before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that gift card is Paul Sherrill from Washington. So congratulations to Paul. We'll be in touch to get you your card.
Let's split that, Paul. Me and you, buddy. It's Christmas.
And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I again want to thank Levern for putting together a really informative presentation. And I'd also like to thank Rubrik for making this event possible. And last but not least, I'd like to thank all of you for attending and for your questions. So that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.